I think the gain from implementing FWAR from the perspective of our employees and our educators is really that when they can balance their work commitments and their family commitments, they are happier, they have better well-being, and they give their best at work and they're able to rest at home. I think that is the biggest gain that we have out of this whole FWAR policy.
There was a staff from this particular HR head who was very skilled and knowledgeable in industrial relations, but the person wanted to take time off because of some personal caregiving needs. So how do you retain that talent, right? So the creative solution was, I just hire you for one skill to be able to support me in industrial relations. So it's a skill, right? So I employ you based on skill, and then I retain you based on that, and then I agree with you how many hours you need to work for that particular week. So I think these kind of opportunities become very interesting.
Welcome to the second episode of IHRP's Learning with Leaders podcast series, where we explore the latest trends, challenges, and innovations shaping the workplace. Hi, my name is Adrian, and I'm the CEO and founder of Career Agility International. Of late, the Singapore workforce has been abuzz regarding a set of flexible work arrangement guidelines that will be introduced on 1st December 2024. These outline how companies should handle requests for flexibility regarding work locations, work hours, and workloads. However, the implementation and execution of these guidelines may prove to be a challenge for both businesses and HR leaders alike. Today, we will dive into the topic of flexible work arrangement requests, featuring insights from Mr. Aslam Sardar, who is the CEO of the Institute for Human Resources Professionals, and Ms. Evelyn Tay, the Chief Executive Officer and Group CHRO at EtonHouse. So let's start with the basics. For those of us who may not be so familiar with the FWAR guidelines, could you explain what exactly the flexible work arrangement requests entail? Aslam?
First of all, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And perhaps it is good to take one step back to understand the impetus for the flexible work arrangement requests. So I think over the years, our human capital practices in Singapore has evolved and in fact has improved with the many tripartite standards, advisories, and guidelines. And one of the intents is really to shape norms of good practices in organizations. And it's also to address and reflect some of the macro trends in our labor market. Of course, demographics being one, every one of us would know by now that we are facing an aging population in Singapore. In fact, in less than 2 years, we will be known as a super aged society. And after COVID, there's a lot of changes in the way expectations have evolved in the workplace. So under that kind of environment, the flexible work arrangement requests, tripartite guidelines have evolved and grew out of. So what does it entail? It basically entails guidelines and processes to help organizations, employers and employees come together, discuss their needs of employees who may have flexible work arrangements. And flexible work arrangements doesn't mean you work from home. In fact, flexible work arrangement has different types, one of them being flexible load. There could be flexible time. There also could be other types of flexibilities, right, that companies can create in discussions with the staff and the employees. So flexible work arrangements need not necessarily be, just one view or one type. And the guidelines actually also provide some advice, some guidance on how to actually make a request. So, for example, you have to be very clear in indicating that it is a formal request. So, informal requests is not covered under the guidelines. Informal request means if you call your supervisor or your manager up and say, I just need some time off to pick up my child, that's an informal request. That doesn't come under the flexible work arrangement request guidelines. But if you may need something for a longer period, then it is good to send an email or fill in a form depending on what the processes are in organizations, where you state very clearly, I need it for which duration, what is the reasons, and then how this is going to be managed between the employee and the employer, right? Expectations being clearly discussed, and actually it defines that process, right, for organizations to adopt.
So, Evelyn, what exactly does the flexible work arrangement request guidelines mean for a practitioner like you, who is both the operational lead as well as the CHRO of your organization?
Definitely, it has helped us as an organization. In the early childhood sector, we are facing a manpower crunch, so there's increasing difficulty in attracting qualified educators to join the sector. And also, we also experience our own educators wanting to start a family, caring for their aged parents. So this allows them to explore flexible working arrangements such that we could sustain their work-life balance and continue to retain them and also attract more people to join the sector.
Oh, that's great. How has the FWAR framework and guidelines affected organizations? Especially, what do you feel are the potential benefits as well as the challenges to these organizations who implement it?
If you look at the landscape in Singapore, the landscape involves companies that are large multinationals as well as companies who are SMEs. So I think both large multinationals and SMEs react and respond to FWA in different ways, and they face different types of challenges. For multinational companies, our sense and the feedback that we get is that it's not uncommon. It's something that is already practiced. They have internal policies and processes. They have forms that can be, filled, technology being utilized. So there's less of a concern with that group of people, and in fact, some of them are already actively practicing this even before the guidelines, came to fruition. For the SMEs, it again depends because by and large, most SMEs do practice some form of informal, flexible work arrangement requests, adoption. So some informality already exists. However, from a process standpoint, some of them may still face some difficulties because SMEs typically, they're very agile. They don't like documentations. They like to move things fast. So when you layer a process in, it could be a concern. But if you really look at the FWAR document, and if you look at the templates that exist in that Tripartite Guidelines document, it's actually a very simple form. And organizations don't have to create a new process. They just have to take the guidelines and adopt it. It's a matter of willingness from the employers to embrace this new form. And perhaps they may need to raise some of their capabilities and standards in engaging the employees, because more often than not, organizations, they struggle with talent retention, attraction. These are some of the issues many businesses face. So I think there's some concerns that if a FWA request were to be implemented nationally, would it mean that more employees would be more demanding and request unreasonably, right? But I think this is perhaps a fear that can be managed if, let's say, the employers and the employees sit down and discuss. One very important condition in the or statement in the document says that there must be business reasons to support the flexible work arrangement request. So this is really to assure the businesses that when you give FWA requests, it's not when someone requests you can straight away give. You actually have to evaluate whether it contributes to or it will be detrimental to your organization. Will it raise your costs unnecessarily? Will it affect your productivity? And I think if those things happen, then actually the guideline says you need not approve the flexible work arrangement request. And I think this also puts some level of responsibility on the workers. Workers should not just come in and make a request just because they want to, right? They have to also think very deeply why I need it. How can I help the organization to do this successfully in the organization rather than simply, a need that you want that has no basis. So they have to adopt a more responsible mentality in engaging. So personally, when I think about the whole process and the whole um, articulation of how it could be implemented, it's actually quite elegant, in raising the capabilities not just of the employer, but in effect raising the responsibility of the worker concurrently.
So the way I see it, it's almost like both sides, both parties have to come to an agreement and understanding in order for this to work.
Yeah.
That
In
sounds
fact,
really
in fact,
good.
I think it is a very good nudge to help raise the overall human capital practices in organizations. And it's a very subtle way of doing it. So I find that it's actually a very elegant process, an elegant idea.
But do you find that this might be a challenge for HR practitioners? Because it might be something new for them to actively engage the employees who are making such requests.
I think Evelyn, being a CHRO, can better understand that. But my own interactions with many of the CHROs and HR practitioners in our certified community, the HR community actually is quite familiar with all this because part and parcel of the HR job is to engage employees. So I think that experience, that capability already exists. I think what perhaps is a challenge is how to engage the business and convince the business that this is good for the organization and actually good for the business, because business leaders will naturally gravitate towards day-to-day pressures, cash flow, operations, effectiveness, efficiency, and all that. So how does this policy translate to helping the business leader? And business leader also have to also consider the impact of staff leaving if, let's say, you don't have practices to retain staff, right? So HR has to engage the business to say, okay, what is the consequences if you lose a staff, and then what is the opportunity cost of replacing that staff on your efficiency and your operations? So I think that part of it is where maybe the HR community really needs to step up, be proactive, and confidently engage the business to have that risk conversation of not having flexible work arrangements accommodated or considered at least.
Evelyn, for yourself, what were some of the challenges as an HR practitioner and an HR leader in the organization convincing the leadership teams that this would be beneficial to the company?
For EtonHouse, when FWAR was announced, I think from the perspective of our educators, our principals of our various schools, the first reaction they have is they think FWAR means that the teachers are going to request to work from home. And of course, their first reaction is how are we going to make this work? So it does cause a little bit of commotion. And from the perspective of a HR practitioner, we needed to communicate to the various business leaders, our principal, that is not what it entails. From how I see it, I think FWAR give clarity on what is a flexible work arrangement, that it doesn't mean you're only working from home. It means that we are going to give you flexible time, we are going to give you flexible load. And more often than not, we have been doing that actually. And there are a lot of educators, when they want to balance their work, they realize that there is no clarity around the possibility of going on a flexible work arrangement. Very often they decide to leave. And then when you initiate a conversation, when they decide to resign, it may be too late. So I feel that from an angle of from a HR angle, this gives a lot of clarity for the business leaders, for the principals, how this is going to work for them. And it will actually help to retain our good educators, our employees. And in turn, it actually help us minimize the phase change for our students and for our children, which is what we want to have in our organization.
I actually think one of the nice things, one of the great things about the FWAR guidelines is that it provides a framework for both the business as well as the employees to come to a common understanding of what are the right processes as well as what the expectations are. So I think in terms of expectation management, it's really good as well. So it seems to me that FWARs can be used to develop a competitive edge in the market. How can HR professionals and employers alike strategically plan and implement FWARs to unlock productivity in their teams?
You asked a very good question, and I think this really is the the key message that we have to get the HR to communicate to business, right, and work with the business to actually develop the compelling proposition of why it adds or contributes to productivity gains or revenue growth. So I think the first thing is always to look at, if you ask me, if I put a business lens to it, what is the opportunity cost of hiring or losing a talent or staff? If you actually do the math, um, the cost is effectively 3 to 4 months of wages, and that's from the HR cost, right? But 3 to 4 months potentially of every business matrix you're going to lose. If you actually lose people and not get them to work, let's say maybe you are in the F&B business or any business which has operational requirements, you may need to shut down certain lines or close off certain parts of maybe a restaurant because you don't have enough people serving in those places, because you don't have flexibility to give to that extra workforce that can come in and help you. So I think there are all these very nuanced business risks that HR should actually sit down with the business to work with them to define, and then say, okay, if I bring in staff with some flexibility, maybe I give this staff some flexibility to work for 2 days or 3 days per week, right? Like part-time is one example. How can I load balance between two part-time persons, to manage the shift? How will that add to maybe revenue growth or productivity gain? So I think there are many ways to cut the conversations with business, because there are so many different types of businesses.
How about at EtonHouse? I understand that even before the 1st of December implementation of the guidelines, you have already been practicing this for quite a while. What were some of the productivity gains or benefits you've actually seen on the ground implementing these guidelines? What are your thoughts about this, Evelyn?
At EtonHouse, I think the part about implementing FWAR, I think change management is key, which entails communication with all your business unit leaders and your principal, engaging them in the process of devising how are we going to implement the FWAR. So that is the key to the success of FWAR implementation here. And the other part that Aslam pointed out just now is really about how do you automate some of the processes and digitalize. For example, we actually automated the whole process of documentation, the learning of our children on a platform that parents can have access to. It allows them to be able to do that at home rather than stay in school. So that gives them the flexibility to have a sort of like a work from home rather than staying in school for longer extended hours. So I think in preparation for the success of FWAR, a lot of this is really trust, is a communication and also change management. I think the gain from implementing FWAR from the perspective of our employees and our educators is really that when they can balance their work commitments and their family commitments, they are happier, they have better well-being, and they give their best at work, and they're able to rest at home. I think that is the biggest gain that we have out of this whole FWAR policy.
So I think that's a very good point. In fact, on productivity, companies must really look hard at what productivity means. Does productivity means more output over inputs? Does productivity mean for the same amount of input, right, I can get more output, but actually I also solve some of the other issues like attraction, retention, attrition. So I think productivity measures today, if you take a purely economist view, is maybe a little bit narrow. And companies really need to broaden their thinking of what is productivity. So we encourage companies to think hard about productivity, but at the same time think hard about the other measures, like attrition, right, retention, some of the very important HR matrix, which more often than not businesses ought to pay attention to, rather than just ignore them.
Yeah, I guess what you're saying is to adopt a holistic view rather than just productivity numbers, but the entire economic value add for the whole exercise. And I think that will bring huge benefits, not just in terms of monetary, but also in terms of social benefits. And if you translate this across all organizations in Singapore, I think it will cause a huge fundamental shift upwards in the productivity of Singaporeans as a whole, doesn't it?
Yeah, hopefully, and that I think should be the bigger picture direction we ought to take.
So, looking ahead, what are your recommendations for organizations who are considering implementing FWARs?
I think for me, every organization, and I hope all the HR professionals who are listening to this or business leaders who are listening to this, keep a conscious mind that 1st December is going to happen. But don't wait until the day before or the week before to start implementing things. Start now. Immediately, if possible, next week, have conversations with the staff. Have a town hall. Have a management meeting. Have a team meeting. Talk to the staff about the Tripartite Guidelines on Flexible Work Arrangements. Before you do that, read the document. Read the document and understand the intent and understand what is in it so that you don't misunderstand the intention and misunderstand that the process is too cumbersome and start making preconceived ideas that workers are all going to ask for work from home. I don't think that is the case. In fact, Singapore workers are, in my opinion, quite sophisticated, right? Quite intelligent, and they should be treated like that and they should be engaged like that. So read the document, talk to the staff, engage the staff. You'll be surprised. Some of them may not really want to work from home at all. Some of them prefer to be in the office. Some of them may have genuine needs that you may not have discovered, right? Until you have spoken to them. So speak to them. Start organizing those town halls if you are a CEO or if you are a business function head. And then look at your policies. If you have a policy, great. Communicate it. Communicate it many times, right? In IHRP, we have a flexible work arrangement policy since 2019. When I took over as CEO 2 years ago, the first thing I asked the staff was, did you know that we had that policy? Many of them actually didn't know. So we initiated a re-onboarding of staff on many of our HR policies, one of them being FWA. And then we actually encouraged people who in our employ who say, if you really do need it, apply, right? And then when one or two started applying, more started applying. But we work with them, we work with the team, have team conversations, right? So that when someone goes on an FWA program, right, it doesn't affect the rest. Make sure that all these little things are being done. Take a conscious effort to it. Yes, it may take you more time to engage your staff, but believe me, it will be worth it because you will know your staff better and you will actually become a better leader.
How about yourself, Evelyn?
I agree with Aslam. We didn't wait till 1st December. In fact, we have just sent out the policy to our business unit leaders as a first step to get their feedback on how that policy in terms of the process of requesting is going to work for them. And then we will further engage the rest of the organization to hear their feedback bottom up so that before we roll this out, we have actually considered everyone's feedback on how this is going to work for them. So that change management is very important. For the successful implementation of FWAR, there are a few key elements. I think trust is important between the employees and the employers, and also clarity with regards to the KPI that you expect from your team members if they go on FWAR. That is important to give clarity in terms of how is this job description going to be, how are the expectation on the performance of these employees going to be if the person adopt that. And together with that is also that perceived equity of the rest of the team members who are not on FWAR, that they feel that it is actually done as equitable as possible. So I think that actually contribute to the success of the successful implementation of FWAR.
And I thought Evelyn brought up a really good point on a number of other issues like equity. And maybe I want to add to that. Think very carefully about your business, right? Look at your business processes, and look at your business impact, and have an honest conversation with HR or with the staff that if we do FWA, how can we do it? And if we cannot, explain it. because I think not all organizations or all businesses can adopt FWA or the same kind of FWA across the board, right? There will be some organizations where you are front facing, you are client facing, and frontline, you have inevitably have to be at work, right? So you cannot be working from home, but you can be on a flexible shift, right? So there's also flexibility, by the way. So I think very hard how to do it. I think some of the examples in the healthcare industry that was reported in the news were very good examples, but it requires more sophistication in scheduling. So go and understand your business very carefully and see how best to structure different types of FWA for different individuals. And of course, at the end of the day, if you really cannot implement it, communicate to your staff, explain to them the reasons, right? And be open and transparent with them. And my request also is, employees who are looking at FWA, think very hard, whether your request is reasonable and fair or not, and be proactive in collaborating with the organization to design something that actually suits you, right? Not because you want it, but because how can you help the organization as well?
So, what I'm hearing from the both of you is in order to have a successful implementation, it requires a lot of trust,
Yep.
a lot of communications between both HR with the business as well as HR with the employees. And I think what I like to hear is I've been hearing as well is the equity part of it. Is it equitable? And if you have continuous engagement, because I understand it's not a one-off event, it's a process, right? And the advice which I'm hearing as well about starting early rather than waiting till 1st of December, I think that's excellent because it does take a bit of time to roll out and implement as well successfully.
And I think one more thing to add is that the responsibility to have a successful flexible work arrangement request implemented in your organization is not just a HR responsibility. It is a responsibility of every people manager. So if you are managing someone, you have to take ownership, right? If you have a HR department, good, work with the HR department and collaborate with the HR department to engage the staff. If you don't have a HR department, read the document, familiarize. IHRP have resources. You can actually access some of our playbooks to get the resources. When some of the resources are rolled out with TAFAP and IHRP, you can access it to familiarize yourself with it, right? And then spend time learning how to communicate with your staff, because fundamentally, if you build that bridge, right, trust is engendered, and then I think it'll be more successful implementation.
And in fact, actually, in terms of that, I think the employee themselves also play a very key part about the mindset that they have, the accountability that they have towards being given that flexibility. They need to also take the ownership to show up at work, be present, be able to meet the expectation that employers have on them. And that would actually contribute to the successful implementation of this.
What do you feel are some of the biggest misconceptions about FWAR when it's being announced to the market? Misconceptions from both the business as well as misconceptions from the employees in the organization.
I think it is not a misconception, but rather a concern, right? And the concern is flexible work arrangement requests could come in the form of work from home. I think this is the predominant, or my sense is this might be the predominant concern among the business leaders. The other concern, I think, is we are already in a tight labor market, right? So trying to find a way to manage and balance the workload among different employees and workers, some businesses may find that it is a challenge. They may not know how to do it. So this concern may actually accentuate when there is a tripartite guideline that requires us to provide that on request. So I think these are to me the two dominant. One is very operational, right? How do I manage it operationally? And then one is, will workers become unreasonable, right, in their requests and demand work from home, even when the job cannot accommodate that, right? So, for example, some operational jobs like if you work in a lab and you're doing lab experiments, it's actually not possible to transfer your lab experiment into the home, right? You need to be present. Then when the request comes, how do you manage? So I think these are concerns. But I feel that while these are all valid concerns, um, a lot of businesses need to take this opportunity and seize the moment and say, what can I do to improve processes? What can I do to maybe redesign the job so that I can accommodate this and gain productivity, right? And this is exactly some of the questions we asked internally in IHRP, where we say that if we want to give flexibility, what are some of the job functions, job roles, job tasks that we need to change, right? If we don't need the person to be in the office all the time and they need to work at home, right? What does it mean? How should they work, right? And what is the expectations? So we started to really study this, and then voila, it gave us a lot of ideas to say, hey, maybe I should reduce this step, I should cut this step, I should do this, I should do that. And slowly, one by one, we started with just one request, and then we looked at it. Then after that, we started with another request. So as the requests keep coming in from different departments, I told the department heads, I said, okay, see how you can accommodate, but at the same time, see how you can, reduce steps. So we reduce workload at the same time. It's not easy, but I think if you seize it as an opportunity, and I mean, if you see it from that lens rather than see it as a lens of, oh no, it's going to be problematic to manage, then I think you're missing the true value of these tripartite guidelines on flexible work arrangements.
I'm going to throw a spanner in the works here and say that for the IHRP, I think the implementation would have been a lot smoother because it's actually leadership driven. Because you are the CEO and you are saying, hey, we're on board. And I think that's why it's a wonderful transformation process. But what about organizations, Evelyn, for where the leadership may not be so for it? How does HR play a role in influencing these leaders? And more importantly, especially in some organizations in the smaller companies where HR may not play a significant role at the table, and where it's more operational, and the leadership team is looking and going like, this is just additional work. This doesn't work. How would HR actually convince and influence leadership teams?
A lot of this is really communication and engagement. I think the greatest fear when this is implemented is that the question I get very often is, can I say no? What if one whole big group of teachers come to me and I already don't have enough teachers and I can't say no to them? I think that being able to share with your business unit leaders, your principals, that this is a process. It allows employee to ask, and we are encouraging open communication. You can say no, and we have guidelines for you. It helps put them at ease that this is a process. It's like you have a choice, and you actually can have a good discussion with your team members on how this is going to work for you. I think clarity around the policy itself and how they can go, and also, of course, the support that HR is going to give you as a business unit leader to partner with you in your conversations with your educators, your employees, will put them at ease and be more open-minded about the policy.
I think in addition to that, because HR has a deep understanding of the people issues and the people matters, and I think if HR can articulate, right, the impact of not considering or adopting this, and having that conversation with the business leaders, then I think that that is also one way of engaging the business leaders. What is the impact if you don't have this? So one senior HR person I recently spoke to had a very real conversation with business head, because they are in their front line, they're operational, and they have to man the stores even over the weekends. So the answer to the business leader was, we are already having a lot of difficulty getting people to work on weekends, right? If you don't provide flexibility, you're going to have difficulty hiring. If you have difficulty hiring, your business cannot grow, right? So the question is, how do you really think hard about the consequences of not adopting this policy? right? So the businesses then realized that, hey, we need to work with the HR. And they started to really work with the HR to look at scheduling, look at different ways to structure employment, right? Employment need not be full-time. Employment can be part-time. You can even employ a person based on a specific type of skill. Actually, this was a very interesting example I heard where there was a staff from this particular HR head who was very skilled and knowledgeable in industrial relations, but the person wanted to take time off because of some personal caregiving needs. So how do you retain that talent, right? So the creative solution was, I just hire you for one skill to be able to support me in industrial relation. So it's a skill, right? So I employ you based on skill, and then I retain you based on that. And then I agree with you how many hours you need to work for that particular week. So I think these kind of opportunities become very interesting. I also heard of one in the F&B where a very elderly lady, in fact, past 70, she's only working actually on the weekends because she got nothing to do in the weekends. She actually spend more time with her friends during the weekday. So she come back to the job, and she's very happy serving, right? So now this becomes a very creative opportunity to expand your workforce, right, over the weekend, which is a very difficult role to cover on a weekend, because not many people want to do. So you actually, if you think of flexible work arrangements more creatively, you can broaden your workforce range to include a lot more types of workers to come in. Of course, it will take some time for you to be creative, to create the different schedules, to organize it, so that you get a certain efficiency gain. But I think you can solve some of your business problems just by being creative and tapping on this opportunity. So I would rather people see it as an opportunity rather than see it as a cost.
And I think if you celebrate successes, those situations where it has been effectively implemented, it would actually send a positive encouragement to the rest of the business unit leader, how this can also work for them.
That's true.
Yeah.
I like that. What would you say to HR person or even a business person? Okay, and I heard this on the ground. They said that, this FWAR framework, it sounds like a lot more work, a lot more bureaucracies involved, a lot more forms and everything. Is it even necessary? And is it going to bog us down? Do we need to hire someone else just to handle these requests, especially in a big organization? How will you respond to that, Evelyn?
I think a lot of time is really conversations. We are trying to facilitate this by digitalizing the process so that there won't be a lot of administrative work. But on top of that, in our policy, we encourage conversations to happen first before it gets channeled via a form.
Aslam, from your experience, how has it been?
So I've heard that in different forms, like, I'm already giving FWA informally, right? Do I really need this? So I go back to what the guideline says. The guideline is very clear. If an organization has its own practices on flexible work arrangement requests, then workers should follow that, right? So this is only for organizations that do not have existing policies or practices around that, and therefore they don't know how to do it. So these guidelines acts as a guide to help, right? But fundamentally, what the intent of the guideline is to ensure that organizations raise their human capital practices. And to raise your human capital practices, you actually need to have good human capital processes. If you have no processes, then you don't have practice,
Yes,
right?
true.
So I think that companies or business leaders who say those things perhaps should take a pause and ask, how important is my worker to me, right? How important is it for me to have a healthy, to have a productive workforce? If the answer to those questions are, it is important, then I think it is important for the business leader who makes that comment to say, okay, then maybe I really need to put some thought into having good processes. And in fact, the Tripartite Guidelines is not an onerous process at all. It's actually a very simple process. If you look at the guideline, it tells you, okay, put in a formal request. So it's a formal request. Informal can still continue its current practice. put in a formal request, make sure you have all these mentioned, and then there's a timeline given for the employers to consider. There's a timeline given for them to respond to the employees, 2 months, and then after that make a decision. And you can even reject it, because if it doesn't serve your business interest or it causes more problems for you business-wise, you can reject it, but you must explain. So it's actually helping organizations to raise their process and practice. So I would encourage organizations that truly value their workers and truly think very consciously about business success to see how I can adopt this for greater business success.
In fact, what I did also to add on to this process that's recommended, we added in a period of 3 months for it to be tested in a sense, so that we encourage our business unit leader to not say no, but give it a try for 3 months and see how it works both ways.
Was there initial resistance to the idea, or did everyone embrace like, hey, it's a great idea?
It's quite early days, I must say, but I have a business unit leader coming to me to get more clarity around it. So I would say it's still early to say whether it would the reaction from the ground is good or not. But I think it's a first step, and early implementation is good because it allows the change to gradually set in for the organization.
So in IHRP, we had a slightly different phenomenon. I'm all in favor for flexibility, in fact. And when I learned that we have this wonderful policy, right, very comprehensive, it's been around even before my time. I said, okay, do that, because everyone would have certain needs. So why don't we just let the staff know and tell them to adopt it, right, if you need it. At first, people were very pensive, right? The workers, our staff was like, oh no, should I not? So they were very pensive. And actually, the funny thing happened. They were worried what their colleagues thought about them.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't the case that, I need it, I apply. So there's also another phenomenon which no one is really talking about, is the perception of the individual among their peers. So in fact, what we did was we started to have, and I mentioned, between me and my HR, we actually spoke about this in management updates and briefings to our staff, in town halls. We said, you shouldn't be afraid. If you truly need it, speak to your leaders. And of course, we also facilitate in the team engagement. So team engagement is very important, because you don't want the person to take the FWA and then feel like, they are imposing on their colleagues. Actually, that's also a very important psychological phenomenon that people tend to overlook when they are thinking of FWA. So I think this is why one of the best practices I heard when we were doing the study trips to understand how other countries and companies implement it, team engagement was just as important, where, the staff may want it, but, HR or the business leader facilitate conversations among the teams, right? How can we load balance among the rest of the team? And then after that, possibly redesign some steps, and then allow the staff to go. And also to ensure the staff that you are not going to be penalized in your appraisal because you are on FWA. We will measure you fairly and make sure that you are measured based on the KPIs we agree with you, right? Nothing above, nothing below. So I think these are the nuances of FWA implementation. Perhaps more capability and more discussions, in fact, more examples should be shared of how other people do it. We learn this by trial and error. If I had known about this psychological effect and someone had told me this earlier, I probably would have taken a step back and say, okay, we really have to be, more encouraging. Otherwise, because for a while, no one took it up. Then I was quite
and
curious.
you were wondering why, right?
Yeah, no one took it up. I was quite curious, and I thought everybody, people will welcome it.
Yeah.
But now actually is already part and parcel of IHRP's practices. People are voluntarily coming forward to request. We get all sorts of requests. So our practice is, if you need it for less than 3 months, actually you just work it out between you and your HOD and your team, right? That's informal as far as we understand. But if you need it for more than 3 months, then we have a form. You fill in the form, the conversations happen. And I think the 2-month timeline in the guideline is reasonable, because you do need to engage the team. You really need to study what is the impact to the business. So we also practice some of these, in our own way. We are not that complex a business, and I thought this would be another perspective that maybe is an underrated perspective.
No, I find it interesting actually when you mentioned that the employees themselves are worried about burdening their own colleagues. And that's something which we wouldn't immediately think about, but it does happen. So I think once again to Evelyn's point about communications,
Yeah.
and I like what you mentioned about sticking to the KPIs that you've agreed upon. Because I have heard before individuals who worry that if I do a flexi work, then if the boss is not happy or if my performance isn't there, what actually will be the impact on my performance, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Evelyn, it's been very educational, it's been very enlightening, and I like the fact that you've been sharing so much personal anecdotes and operational experiences. I'm very excited to see what the whole landscape is going to be moving forward with this new FWAR guidelines in place. So we'd like to thank you both for sharing your experiences and your lessons that you've learned in the implementation of FWARs, especially the practical tips that you've given us along the way. If you have any other questions with regards to FWAR implementation, please feel free to reach out to IHRP, and we will be happy to share all our information, knowledge, and playbooks with you. This is Adrian. Thank you very much for your time.